I'm Booher. I've been working in the field of addiction for over 30 years now. And what I want to do this afternoon is to try to help you answer a question that most of you have asked. Maybe you didn't speak it out loud, maybe you did. But most family members of addicts, most people who care about the alcoholic or the addict, at some point in the progression of the addiction, and I'll remind you this several times, addiction is always progressive, it always gets worse. At some point in that progression, the family member or the friend will begin to say to themselves a very reasonable question. And the question is simply this: why doesn't he just stop? I mean, it's a very reasonable question to ask. The wife sees her husband drinking. I mean, there's no question his drinking is affecting the marriage, but maybe it's also affecting his job, causing him job problems or legal problems or health problems. I mean, anybody could clearly see that his drinking is causing multiple problems, not so much for her, but for him, and yet he keeps on drinking. Doesn't make any sense to her. The husband comes home at lunchtime unexpectedly. He has two daughters, ages 2 and 4, who are playing in the front yard. At first, his girls don't see him, so he just sits in the car. The front door's ajar. He's waiting for his wife to come out. 4 or 5 minutes goes by. She hasn't come out the door yet, so he gets out of his car and he walks toward the house. His girls see him come running, "Daddy, Daddy," and he hugs his little girls, and he asks the 4-year-old, "Where's your mama?" And she shrugs her shoulders. That's weird. He puts them in the car and locks them in and goes in the house. Hollers for his wife. No answer. Goes upstairs. Yells for her upstairs. Still no response. Goes back downstairs, goes out in the backyard, screams as loud as he can scream. No answer. Now he's getting really, really worried. He's rushing back through the house to go to his car, to get his phone to call 911, and as he crosses the front door threshold, he happens to glance behind the front door, and there on the couch behind the front door is his wife asleep. And the next thing he sees is a bottle of pills on the floor next to her. He grabs her by her shirt, shakes her as hard as he can. Her eyes pop open. He screams at her, "You promised me you wouldn't do this anymore. You gave me your word. I'm not putting up with this. I'm over this." He takes that bottle of pills, he shakes them in her face. He says to her, "If you ever take another one of these stupid pills, I'm leaving you. I'm taking those 2 girls in the car with me, and you will never see him again." He takes the bottle, storms out of the house, gets in his car, drives his little girls to his mother's house, and goes back to work. He leaves his wife there devastated. She has never felt this humiliated in her life. She's not crying, she's sobbing. Sobbing, sobbing, sobbing. 4 to 5 minutes goes by, and she finally begins to pull it together. And besides being in touch with the embarrassment and the shame that she feels, she gets in touch with some anger. He can't do that. I'm their mother. There's no way he can take my girls from me. She gets up, she goes upstairs, she goes in her walk-in closet. She goes in a dirty clothes hamper, she throws out the dirty clothes, gets another bottle of hydrocodone, and takes 2. 10 minutes ago, her husband said to her, "I will leave you and take the girls with me." He meant it, and she knows he meant it. If you take any more pills, and she takes 2. That's illogical. That's irrational. And that's the kind of behavior that family members deal with day in and day out. Why doesn't he just stop doing that? Well, it's normal when you're dealing with irrational behavior to try to rationalize it. And family members do that. Maybe it's this job, maybe it's this stress, maybe it's all the housework and taking care of the kids. They begin to look for reasons. And as they continue to look for reasons, and nothing's making any sense, believe it or not, more often than you might think, the family member begins to think, well, maybe it's me. Maybe it's my fault. I know that's true. Because in 1978, I was addicted to pain pills. I've been addicted for about a year. I would stop taking them for a while, and then start taking again, and stop taking for a while, and then start taking. This is a Saturday morning. I've been taking them since Monday. I was going to work, and my wife stopped me at the door, and she looked at me in my eyes, and she said to me, "You're taking those pills again, aren't you?" You know what I said? No! I am so disappointed in you that you would even ask me that question. I told you I wasn't going to take those pills anymore. So I storm out of the house. So Saturday morning's a half day. I get home at 12:30. Walk in the sliding glass door. She was in her chair at our little family room. And the first thing I spotted was a bottle of pills in her hand that I had cleverly hidden in the utility room behind the carport. She'll never find them here. Well, she found them. There they were. Now, every time this had happened before, she would ask me about taking pills, or accuse me of taking pills. I would lie to her until I couldn't lie anymore. Every single other time it had happened, she would blast me. You know, she would scream at me and yell at me. So when I saw the bottle of pills, that's what I was ready for. But my eyes drifted from the pills up to her face. Instead of seeing that angry look that I was prepared for, my wall was up. Instead of seeing that look, I saw tears coming down her face. Well, her mother had been sick, and my first thought was something happened. I said, "Well, is your mom?" She said, "Mama, it's fine." She says, "I just figured this out this morning." I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "I know when you take these pills. You know, I can look at you. And I know you lied to me, but I can look at you, and I know when you're taking these pills. And I know you didn't take pills before we got married. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. I know you must be disappointed in me. This happened in 1978. I know you must be disappointed in me. Tell me what you want me to do. I will do anything." This very bright young woman, the only logical reasons that she could come up with that I would take these pills and risk my job, risk my license, risk my life, was it had to be her fault. And that's a true story. And she's not unique. You know, spouses oftentimes deal with this. Almost always parents do. You know, when we have a young person who comes into treatment for addiction, invariably the parent will say, "What did we do wrong?" And I understand that. I'm a parent. I have 3 grown children. And when one of our children starts having problems, our first response, or my first response, is, "What did I do wrong?" Would you believe that sometimes kids think it's their fault? We had this father in treatment, and the son was not 17 years old, smart guy, athletic, came to the family workshop. And he said to me, "Dr. Booher, you think if I'd been the starting quarterback, my daddy would have come to my games instead of drinking with his friends? Do you think he was embarrassed of me because I was the backup quarterback?" What may surprise family members in this room, because you probably never heard it. I know I never said it. Almost always, at some point in the progression, and remember, addiction is progressive, almost always at some point in that progression, the alcoholic or the addict will arrive to the place that they will say to themselves, "Why can't I stop?" I never said that. I would say things like, "Do you think I'm a drug addict? I'm a doctor. Doctors don't get addicted to drugs. I've been through medical school." Have you been through medical school? I take these pills when I have back pain. I'm not a drug addict. Don't you remember, last month when I stopped for 2 weeks? Drug addicts can't stop taking drugs. As those words were leaving my mouth, deep down inside my soul, I was asking the same thing that she was asking. Because I got to the point that I didn't want to take pills anymore. I honestly didn't want to take them anymore. But I just couldn't seem to stop. Anything else in my life that I had set my mind to do, I could do it. I got it done. I decided I wanted to be a doctor. And my father was on disability, had to work 2 jobs when in high school, worked 2 jobs in medical school. But I really wanted to be a doctor. That's what I wanted to do. I set my mind, I really want to stop taking these pills, and I couldn't seem to do it, and I didn't understand why. Now, to be fair, When I first started taking pills, I didn't want to stop. I first started taking pills in 1978. I'd had back surgery when I was 19 and sometimes would have some pain in my back. And I was having a particularly rough time, and I went to the doctor who did the surgery. Back then, they did do MRIs or CT scans. All he did was examine me. And he says, I don't think you have another ruptured disc. I think you have some scar tissue. So he gave me some exercises to do. And then he wrote out a prescription pad and wrote me some pain pills. And he said, if the pain gets really bad, you can take one of these pills. Well, I got the prescription filled, put it in the medicine cabinet. Didn't think about it for a month. Didn't even think about it. I woke up on the Monday morning. My back was killing me. I was actually having trouble moving around. It was hurting so much. I had a busy day in the office that day. There was no way I couldn't go. Oh, I'll take a pain pill. So I wouldn't. Took a pain pill. Got ready for work. Got to work. 45 minutes later, I discovered better living through chemistry. When that pain pill hit my brain, it made me feel like I had never felt before. It made me feel really good. I got really euphoric. I was energetic. Yeah, I relieved the pain, but that wasn't it. It was, I felt really good. I was in a good mood all day. I was nice to the patients, even nice to the nurses. I went home. I was nice to my wife. This is great. This is wonderful. Got up the next day, and I was back down here. But my back wasn't hurting. Didn't think about taking another pain pill. It was another couple weeks, maybe a month later. Same situation. I got up in the morning on a Monday after we had a busy weekend. Back was hurting. I'll take another pain pill. You know what happened? Same thing. It relieved the pain, but it also gave me this energy and this euphoria that I had never had before. Well, over the course of the next several months, some days I would get up and my back was hurting some, so I would take a pain pill, of course. And some days I would get up and my back wouldn't really be hurting. But guess what I would say to myself? I can't afford for my back to hurt today. I'm too busy. I got too much to do. I'm a busy doctor. So I would take a pain pill so my back wouldn't hurt. But over time, as I continued to take the pills, they didn't seem to work quite as well, so I took more and more and more and more and more, till eventually, 6 months later, I was down here all the time. They weren't working. They weren't making me feel good anymore. I was in this dysphoric world all the time. I was trying to get back up to normal. I wasn't trying to get high. I wasn't trying to feel good. I just wanted to feel normal. Every morning I'd wake up. Today's the last day I'm taking these stupid pills. I'm not taking any more. This is the last day. But, I'd have a couple left over in case my back hurt tomorrow, but I'm not going to take them. Next morning I'd get up, take those 2 pills, and go to the drugstore. Every day was going to be the last day. I got to the point that I honestly didn't want to take them, and I couldn't stop. Everybody's not like me. I basically started taking drugs because I liked the way they made me feel. Lots and lots of people who I've treated over the years for addiction start out drinking or using drugs to relieve pain. Not the kind of pain I was having, the physical pain I had all the time, but maybe some severe physical pain like a cluster migraine headaches or spinal stenosis pain. They're in extreme, excruciating pain all the time, and they start using drugs, including alcohol, to medicate that pain. But more common than that is people who begin to use drugs to relieve emotional pain. They don't start out drinking and using drugs to get high. They start drinking and using drugs to try to keep from hurting so much. An example would be you lose somebody that's important to you. Somebody dies. If you've ever had that happen, and most of you have, a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, somebody, God forbid, a child, somebody who's a part of your life is suddenly taken from you, you know what that feels like. It feels like a part of you has been ripped out. It honestly feels like you have a hole inside. And that hole is the absence of that emotional connection with that person that's gone. But you wake up in the morning and the hole is there and the aching is there and maybe some anger is there and maybe even some guilt is there. And it's there all day long. You go to bed at night, and hopefully maybe in the morning I'll feel better. You wake up the next morning, it's still there. Lots and lots of people began to use drugs, began to drink, because they're in intense emotional pain, and they discover the drug takes away that pain. But you know what? Next day, they're in the pain again. It doesn't have to be loss of somebody through death. It could be loss of somebody through mental illness. And let's say you have a parent that's depressed. Well, so if you've ever been depressed before, and I have, when you're depressed, you don't have any emotional energy. I mean, you can barely take care of yourself. You certainly can't take care of anybody else. So if you have the kids who need that emotional connection, that bonding with the parent, and the parent's not available emotionally because of her depression or his depression, that leaves a hole in those kids. I'm not placing blame. The parent doesn't want to be depressed. She doesn't choose to be depressed. But the bottom line is her depression prevents her from being emotionally available to those kids, and that leaves a hole in those kids. You have a situation where, let's say, parents decide to get divorced. They live together. We'll be happier if we don't live together, which is fine. But the only problem is one of the parents leaves, moves away. Not only divorces the wife, but divorces the entire family. He's gone. If you're 16 years old, and all of a sudden your dad has removed himself from your life, do you know whose fault you think that is when you're 16? It's my fault. 16-year-olds are very narcissistic. And that's normal in 16 years old. It's not normal in 26-year-olds. But 16-year-olds see themselves as being the center of the universe. So if something's wrong with the universe, my fault. The 16-year-old feels guilty and also angry and also empty because that parent's gone. Situation of addiction. Let's say the father's alcoholic. Well, if you're chemically dependent, if you're addicted to alcohol or drugs, you're not emotionally available. You can't be actively addicted and be emotionally available at the same time. So if you have a parent that's alcoholic, they're not emotionally available. That leaves a big hole in those kids. Another situation, how about if the granddad was alcoholic? Not the dad, that granddad. The dad doesn't drink. That was my family. My dad didn't drink. You know what? His dad did. And his dad was one of these alcoholics that when he drank, always drank too much, got very abusive. Would hit his wife and hit his kids. My father happened to be the oldest of 5 children. So he quit school when he was like 12 years old and sold newspapers to provide for the family because my granddad couldn't keep a job. And when my granddad would come home drunk, he'd take his brothers and sisters and his mother and take them out in the coal shed to hide them until his dad went to sleep. So he went through all that abuse from that alcohol when he was growing up. He never touched a drop of alcohol. Never did. But because of his inability to bond with his father, because of his father's alcoholism, he didn't really know how to bond with me. I'm not placing blame. It wasn't his fault. But the bottom line, he didn't really know how to connect emotionally with me when I was growing up. And that left a hole. So lots of situations, abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, that always leaves a hole. Always, without exception, leaves a hole. So lots of situations can happen that people discover when they drink or use drugs, it relieves that pain. But for many of them, over time, the drugs become less and less and less and less effective. 17-year-old, father's alcoholic. He's felt empty and angry all the time. He doesn't feel like he fits in. He doesn't feel like he belongs in school. Every morning he wakes up and he's got this emptiness inside and this anger and this guilt inside. And he's on his way home from school. He's a junior, and a new kid that just moved to the school pulls out a joint. Says, "Here, try this. This is good stuff." Well, this 17-year-old 7-year-old's never smoked pot before. But, he wants to fit in. He wants to belong. So, yeah, I do that all the time. So he takes that joint and he starts smoking on that joint. And as he does that, there's a chemical called delta-9-THC that gets into his bloodstream. It goes up to his brain, passes through his blood-brain barrier. When that drug hits the neurons of his brain, guess what? He discovers better living through chemistry. That drug takes away that emptiness, takes away that anger, makes him feel normal. I've had that said to me a dozen times in the last 30 years. And if you can identify with this statement, Dr. Booher, the first time I ever took a drink, the first time I ever smoked a joint, it made me feel normal. If you can identify with that statement, you didn't start out up here. You started out down here for whatever reason. So this kid discovers, this joint makes him feel normal. It becomes less and less effective. 18 months later, it's not really working anymore. Does he stop it? No. He still uses it all day long, but it's just not as effective. What else do you think he does? Looks for something else. He's discovered better living through chemistry. So when the pot quits working, maybe he'll even drink alcohol or use cocaine or start taking hydros. He'll use different drugs, different combinations of drugs, but invariably he'll get to the point that it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't matter what it does. Most people think when an alcoholic's drinking, when a drug addict's using drugs, they're having a good time. They really enjoy it. True for many of us in the beginning. But the bottom line is, when people get to the point that they're saying to themselves, why can't I stop, they're not having a good time anymore. People who come into treatment for addiction are not having a good time anymore when they're using. People come into treatment for addiction because it just isn't working. And you need to understand that. You need to understand that people aren't having a good time when they're using drugs. They're miserable, but they can't seem to stop. So the question is why? Why, when you make up your mind that you're not going to do this anymore, why can't I follow through with that? One of the reasons, I'm sure will come as no surprise, is something called physical addiction. All of the drugs that we're talking about will cause a physical addiction. Physical addiction means you're taking a drug on a regular basis. Your body becomes accustomed to that drug. And then when you take away the drug, the body begins to experience withdrawal. Withdrawal symptoms are the symptoms that your body manifests when you're taking a drug on a regular basis and you stop taking the drug. So if you're drinking on a regular basis, let's say a daily basis, you're drinking a 6-pack a day or 2 6-packs a day, and you say, well, I'm just going to stop drinking. You wake up and you're starting to get a little shaky, and you're a little nauseated, and you're having some cramping and maybe even some diarrhea. And then each minute, each hour, the shakiness intensifies. And maybe, your blood pressure goes up, your pulse rate goes up, and every hour gets worse. Every hour was worse than the last hour. So as you begin to experience that withdrawal, and the symptoms are worsening, you basically get to the point, and I've been to this point many times, I'm going to die. That's what it feels like. Coming off narcotics, you start sweating all over. Your muscles start kicking a habit. Your skin takes on a goose flesh-like appearance. You go in cold turkey. You just ache all over. All of the withdrawal causes a severe insomnia. You can't sleep. And coming off narcotics, every hour the symptoms intensify. And there's this feeling, I'm going to die. And the reality is you might. There's 3 things that will stop withdrawal. One thing is more drug. So if you start into withdrawal Intuitively, you know if you use more drug, it's not going to make you feel good anymore. You're not going to have a good time, but it's going to relieve some of your withdrawal symptoms. The second thing is time. Give it enough time. If you don't die from the third thing is death. And you can die in withdrawal. Lots and lots and lots of people do. You're drinking 2 6-packs a day for the last couple of years and you stop drinking, you can die. Lots of people die in withdrawal. But if you don't die, eventually your body will readjust and the withdrawal symptoms will go away. Eventually. Just curious. How many of these people, many of you in this room are chemically dependent? You know you are. Thank you. Okay. How many of you that just raised your hand got off the drug somehow? You went cold turkey, you went to the hospital, you went to treatment, you went to jail. Somehow you were off, and let's say you were off at least 2 weeks, and you start taking drugs again. Does that make any sense? If this was only had to do with physical addiction, why in the world, after we got off, and the physical addiction was over with, the withdrawal was over with, why would we ever do it again? Do you know I could addict everybody in here to drugs? Everybody, without exception. I'll take this group and I'll strap you down and put an NG tube down your nose and hang up some 80 proof whiskey and I'd start titrating in some whiskey into your stomach. This group, I'd strap you down, put an IV in your arm, start giving you little doses of heroin. This group, I'd strap you down, put an IV in your arm, and start giving you little doses of cocaine. Every day I would increase the dose. In 4 weeks, all of you would be severely, heavily addicted. All of you, without exception. So I take out the NG tubes and I take out the IVs, but I leave you strapped down. All of you would go through withdrawal. You all would get really shaky. Your butt, you would be like this. Some of you might even have a seizure. You might hallucinate. You'd sweat. Your blood pressure would go up. 1 or 2 of you might stroke out because your blood pressure would be so high. If we didn't intervene, 1 of you, 2 of you might even die. You couldn't sleep. Absolutely. This group, you would start sweating all over. You feel like you have the flu 100 times over. If you've ever had the flu, narcotic withdrawal is 100 times worse than the flu. You couldn't sleep. You lose 10 pounds sweating. Your legs would be jerking. Your bones would be hurting. Severe diarrhea, severe cramping. This group would get so profoundly depressed coming off cocaine. It's a hopeless depression. You would beg me to let you up so you could kill yourself. That's the primary withdrawal symptoms of cocaine withdrawal, is that profound depression. Then the next day, you want to beg me to let you up so you kill me, because you get really angry and then you get really depressed again. That'd be that roller coaster thing. But I'll leave you strapped down for another 7 days, and then I'll let you up. Group coming off of alcohol, the shakes would be pretty much gone. You still couldn't sleep. Your blood pressure would pretty much be normal. Hallucinations, all that's a thing of the past. You'd still have trouble sleeping. But you'd be getting pretty much back to normal. The group coming off the narcotics, you would have trouble sleeping too. You still be having some diarrhea, and you still would, feel not the best, but the worst part's over. And this group would still be pretty angry at me, but you would be leveling out some, so, you wouldn't be suicidal or homicidal anymore. All of you would be better. And I say to you, go home, take 2 weeks off, enjoy yourself, and come back in 2 weeks, and I want to do this all over again. How many volunteers? Addicts do that all the time. They get strung out, they get addicted, they get off somehow, they stay off for 2 weeks or a month or 6 months, and then they start doing it again. Why is that? That's not physical addiction. That's called chemical dependency. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the disease of chemical dependency. The physical addiction is a symptom of chemical dependency. It's a late symptom. If you become physically addicted to a drug, it means you've been chemically dependent for a long, long time. But there's 7 symptoms. Physical addiction is only one of those symptoms. It's a symptom. It's not the disease. This is the disease. It's chronic, meaning that once you have it, you always have it. There's no such thing as a cured alcoholic. There's no such thing as a cured diabetic. Diabetes is a chronic disease. Once you have the disease, you always have the disease. Now, you can be a recovering alcoholic. You don't drink today and you go to a 12-step meeting, you can be in recovery, but you're not cured. And 6 months from now, you say, well, I think I'll drink again. The disease will rapidly progress. You know, you can be treated for your diabetes, and your diabetes won't be cured, but it can be in remission, and that your blood sugars can remain normal. And but if you ever say, well, I'm not taking those stupid shots anymore, and you stop taking your medicine, your diabetes will quickly get out of control. It's progressive. And we already talked about that. It always gets worse. Diabetes, especially if untreated, always gets worse and eventually will end your life. Addiction always gets worse without treatment and eventually will end your life. And it's biogenetic. You know, not everybody who drinks becomes an alcoholic. Not everybody that uses cocaine or smokes pot or takes pain pills becomes chemically dependent. Most people who drink, most people don't become alcoholic. If you looked at every 5 people who abuse alcohol or abuse other drugs, out of every 5 people who abuse drugs, out of every 5 people, only 1 of the 5 will cross the wall to become chemically dependent. Only 20% of people who abuse alcohol or abuse drugs becomes chemically dependent. About 95% of these people who become dependent have a father, mother, aunt, uncle, or grandparent with addiction. About 20 to 25% of these people have a family history for addiction. There is no question today that you don't make people addicts. You don't make people alcoholic. Some people are born predisposed to addiction. You can be born predisposed to high blood pressure, to colon cancer, to high cholesterol. You know, there's a lot in breast cancer. There's lots and lots of illnesses that carry a genetic predisposition. Chemical dependency has a genetic predisposition. So if this person who is predisposed begins to use drugs or to drink for whatever reason, to have a good time, like I did, to feel good like I did, or to relieve pain, like a lot of people do, and they use drugs long enough for the addiction potential of the drug, different drugs have different addiction potentials. For adults, it usually takes a decade or longer of drinking to activate alcoholism. Smoking pot may take 10 to 20 years of smoking pot for adults. Not true for adolescents. Happens much more quickly. Adults, it usually requires years of using pot. Pain pills can take weeks and months. IV narcotics, IV cocaine can take days or weeks. The reality is most people don't start shooting drugs until they're already dependent. Now, they don't start out shooting cocaine, they start out snorting cocaine. They cross the wall, they become dependent, they look for other ways of using the drug. So different drugs have different addiction potentials. Bottom line is, if you are genetically susceptible and you begin to use a drug and use a drug long enough for the addiction potential of the drug, then you will cross the wall and become dependent. There's no going back. Once you're across the wall, you're always chemically dependent. Now, what if you don't drink? What if you don't use drugs? My daddy didn't. You know, my daddy taught me several things. And one thing he taught me that I didn't understand until just a few years ago was kinfolk are trouble. Did you ever hear that? Kinfolk are trouble? Isn't that weird? You know what? He believed that. You know why? Because he was the daddy of his family. He had 2 younger brothers, 2 younger sisters, and his mother who always depended on him for everything. You know, if the faucet got a leak, they call him. You know, they were always pulling at him to help. Kinfolk are trouble. I learned that. I understood that about 10 years ago. And they really can be, you know. So, let's say you don't abuse a drug. You don't become dependent. But what if your son begins to take pain pills? then he has a higher risk of becoming addicted. There are two factors responsible for addiction. The first factor is a genetic factor. The second factor is abuse. You have to have the genetic factor and you have to abuse the drug. And you have the genetic factor and you abuse the drug long enough, you cross that wall and become dependent. So what happens when you cross the wall? What happens in here? What's the primary symptom of this disease? You remember I mentioned that physical addiction is a symptom of this disease, but it's a late symptom of the disease. The very first symptom that begins to occur when people first cross that wall is compulsivity. Compulsion to drink. Compulsion to take pills. If you're an addict, you know what I'm talking about. That compulsion. That's the primary symptom of this disease. Now, remember we talked about this disease being progressive. There's early stage addiction, there's middle stage addiction, and there's late stage addiction. In early stage addiction, when you first cross the wall, you have to use the drug to trigger the compulsion. You don't have it all the time. You just have it if you use the drug. Guy calls his wife and says, honey, this is Bill's last day at work. He's my mentor. When I first joined this company, he taught me everything. He's retiring today. We want to throw him a little party. Would you mind if I'm a little bit late tonight? We're going to stop at the pub and have a couple of beers and tell the stories. I'll be home at 7:30. Is that okay? Well, she actually hesitates. And there's a good reason she's hesitating. Because he called her about a month ago. He'd be home at 7:30. He had to do something after work. He didn't show up to 8:45 and he'd been drinking. She could tell. She could look at she knew he'd been drinking. And she got really mad. She'd been worried about him and he hadn't called. And so she went off on him. And at first he got really defensive and then he realized how much she'd been worried about him. So you know what he did? He apologized to her. He says, honey, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to worry you. I think my drinking bothers you a little bit. I know your daddy used to drink a lot and I think my drinking just bothers you. I just won't drink. I don't care that much about it. I just won't drink anymore. Do you know for the last month he's not touched a drop? She knows he hasn't because she's been with him every day. And she can tell when he drinks. So for the last month, he's not touched a drop. So why should she mind if he stops and has a few beers with his friend? Well, he gets to the bar at 4:30. He's early because he's sort of in charge. He orders a cold beer. It really has been a month since he had anything to drink. So he drinks that cold beer, tastes really good. Hits the spot, and he orders another one. Well, he's on his second beer, and some other guys from work start showing up. So, of course, he buys him a beer, That's a polite thing to do. But before long, he's finished with his beer, and then somebody wants to buy him a beer. Well, it's rude to say no when you just bought them a beer, so he lets somebody buy him a beer, and then he lets somebody else buy him a beer. He looks at his watch, it's 6:30, he's going to have to be leaving in a few minutes, or say, oh, he won't be late, he's supposed to be home at 7:30. So he, orders, one for the road. Next thing he notices, they've been having a good time. He happens to glance at his watch, and it's 7:45. He told his wife he'd be home at 7:30. 7:45. He's going to be late. Have any idea what he does? You know what he does? He gets another beer. Why does he get another beer? Because it's already late. She's going to be mad. This is the last time I'm going to be drinking for a while, so I'll have one more. Next thing he knows, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and they're calling him a taxi. He didn't intend to have 16 beers that night. His intention was to have a couple of beers, be home at 7:30. But once he consumed those first few beers, something triggered in his brain to cause him to have a compulsion for another beer and another beer. And he couldn't seem to stop till they cut off the supply. Now, he also has a high tolerance. That's another symptom, 7 symptoms, a high tolerance. Most of you in this room had 17 beers, in 6 hours, you'd be in a coma. He's had 17 beers, and most people couldn't even tell he's been drinking. He's walking around functioning. He seems fine. But the bartender knows exactly how much he's had to drink. He's not leaving that bar in his car. Finally, the taxi gets there at 1:45. It's a 30-minute cab ride home. Do you know what he's praying in the cab ride all the way home? she'll be asleep. Maybe she'll be asleep. Does anybody think she's asleep? He walks in the door. He sees his wife across the room. She's in her easy chair. Her eyes are almost swollen shut. This happened 30-some years ago, 32 years ago. Her eyes are almost swollen shut. She had mascara all over her face. Do you know what this woman had been visualizing for the last 6 hours, 5 hours? He had been in an accident. He was pinned under his truck. His truck is on fire, and he's calling her name to help him. So she said it was like on a Betamax tapes. We had those back then. And it was like on a never-ending spool. I couldn't get out of it. That's all she could think about. He's dying, begging for my help. She can't leave because what did the police department call or the hospital call? She's already called him like a dozen times. What did somebody call? So she's stuck there knowing he's going, he's dying, asking for her to help him. He walks in the door and she can tell he's been drinking. Do you think she's mad? I have never been that angry in all my life. Why did he lie to me? Why did he lie to me? She didn't understand compulsive drinking. Her belief was that he intended to do what he did all along. She didn't understand that. After a few beers, he couldn't seem to stop. He didn't understand why he did what he did. They had a come to Jesus meeting that night. He stopped drinking for a year. Some people stop using in early stage addiction. Did you know that? When people first cross the wall and they only have the compulsion when they use, sometimes they stop. Maybe they have a blackout. They don't remember how they got home last night. And it scares them to death. Or maybe have an accident. Something happens for them to make the decision, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. Well, if they don't do that anymore, they don't have the compulsion. And some people do stop in early stage addiction. And he stopped for a year. Finally convinced his wife on New Year's Eve, it's been a year, we need to celebrate. I deserve just one night, don't I? Everything's been fine, and so she finally agreed, well, they can celebrate New Year's Eve, and, she has a glass of wine, he has the rest of the bottle, and she gets really mad again. Well, this particular couple stuck together, so it took another 10 years of drinking for his drinking to progress. Sometimes spouses say, I've had it, and they're out. And when that happens, the addiction progresses much more rapidly, but she stuck around. But what happened with him was his episodes of drinking got closer and closer and closer together until eventually he woke up in the morning with a compulsion drink. He didn't drink in the morning. There's no way the job he had, no way he could drink in the morning, but all he thought about was drinking all day long. And when can I get my first drink? When people are having the compulsion to use all the time, that's chemical dependency, and that's what causes the physical addiction. Compulsivity, when you don't use the drug, means you're in late-stage disease. Compulsivity, only when you use the drug, is early-stage disease. And it can progress over a period of months, it can progress over a period of years. But when you're having the compulsion every day, you're using every day, your drugs every day, that's what causes you to become physically addicted. So what causes compulsivity? If you could really understand that, if we could understand that, we might be able to get a better handle on addiction as a disease process. Well, if you think about it, what organ system controls everything that we do? I mean, everything. Your breathing, your thinking, basically, the central control system is the brain. And there's different sections of the brain. The cortex, controls your ability to think, to reason, to process. It also controls your mood, your emotions. There's a visual center that controls your vision. You don't actually see with your eye, you see with your brain. There's an auditory center. There's a hypothalamus that controls lots and lots of things. It controls the pituitary gland, which produces lots and lots of hormones. There's memories area. There's the cerebellum that controls your balance. There's the brainstem that controls your breathing. There's lots and lots of different substructures in the brain. But basically, your brain controls everything that you do. The way the brain works is it's made up of cells called neurons. Now, this is an oversimplification of what a neuron looks like. But basically, a neuron has a cell body. It has an extension called an axon, and it has a receptor plate. Every organ system in the human body has unique cell structures. One of the things you learn in medical school is to look under a microscope at a tissue and diagnose or what part of the body they come from. Because, heart cells don't look like liver cells. Liver cells don't look like brain cells. Each organ system has unique cells. And this is what a neuron, a brain cell, looks like. Now, the way the brain works is, when you stimulate a brain cell, it causes an electrical charge. Let me give you an example. I'm talking with you right now. My mouth, my tongue, my larynx, and my vocal cords, I'm creating sound waves. Those sound waves are traveling through the air. Your ear is catching those sound waves. The ear funnels those sound waves down into your external ear. And then they vibrate your eardrum. Your eardrum vibrates those three little bones in the middle ear. And those three little bones in the middle ear vibrate your inner eardrum. Sitting on the other side of your inner eardrum is the acoustic nerve. It's the hearing nerve. The inner eardrum changes that sound wave energy into electrical energy, and it causes an electrical impulse to travel up to the neurons in the brain that receive sound. They're sensory cells. They don't understand sound, they just receive the sound. So they release chemicals, and these chemicals are called neurotransmitters. And these neurotransmitters are released and they activate the next neuron, which stimulates an electrical charge. They go up to activate the cell bodies in the processing cells, auditory processing cells. Those are cells that interpret sound. But they don't remember anything. So they release neurotransmitters that go over and activate the memory cells. And this is instantaneous. Right now, my brain is telling me what to say. Your brain is hearing, understanding, and remembering some of what I say. And that's all controlled by the neurotransmitters in my brain and the neurotransmitters in your brain. Neurotransmitters control everything we do. So angry. That's neurotransmitters, guys. Well, I'm so hungry. I got to have something to eat. That's neurotransmitters. When you recall a memory, that's neurotransmitters. Emotions are neurotransmitters. There's dozens of different neurotransmitters, and some neurotransmitters serve multiple purposes. Neurotransmitters involved in memory are also involved in long-term memory. In emotion are controlled in long-term memory. So neurotransmitters involved in emotion are also involved in long-term memory. I doubt if there's anybody here old enough to remember, but when Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Anybody old enough? Probably not. Well, I was in the 9th grade. The 9th grade. And I remember my science teacher's name was Mr. Long. And he announced that the president was dead. I remember that day. I remember what he wore. I remember his name. I remember where I sat in his room. I remember, where his room was in the school. I don't remember any other 9th grade teachers, but I remember him. Because the emotions that I experienced, the neurotransmitters being released with that announcement, seeping in those memories. How many of you remember what you were doing when you heard the World Trade Center had collapsed? Everybody. How many of you remember what you had for breakfast last Thursday? Well, there's usually one or two. But you see, when you are engaged in an activity that causes strong emotion, you will always remember that. It doesn't have to be grief. If you have children, you remember when you first held your child and you made eye contact with your child, you will take that memory to your grave. Any intense emotional response cements those memories. And it's all controlled by neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters control compulsivity. We know that to be the case primarily because of some research done by a guy named Solomon Snyder. You know what he was trying to do? He was trying to find out why morphine relieved pain. In the 1960s. 1960s, he was trying to find out why morphine relieved pain. Doctors started using morphine in the 1860s. For 100 years, doctors prescribed morphine and Darvon and Demerol and all these drugs were prescribed for pain relief, but nobody knew how they worked. You believe that? What Dr. Snyder discovered was just like there's neurons in the brain that control emotions and appetites, there's neurons in the brain that control pain relief. And when you give somebody a shot of morphine, it goes and activates those neurons. He called these neurons opiate receptors. So there's neurons in the brain that control pain relief. Well, he got to thinking, well, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, when God created man, did he put neurons there that wouldn't be used for, thousands of years till man discovers, the poppy plant? Well, that's possible. But what he concluded was there must be a chemical in the brain that resembles morphine. He discovered the neurotransmitter enkephalin. Enkephalin is the neurotransmitter present in the opiate receptors. It's produced in the pituitary gland that sits at the base of the brain. So when you undergo pain, these cells release the enkephalin and they activate the opiate receptor. And the only reason that morphine works is because it's similar in structure to enkephalin. That's why narcotics work. They mimic the body's own natural neurochemical. That's how they work. And that's a godsend. Can you imagine if we didn't have morphine to relieve pain? What if we didn't have anesthetics? Anesthetics work on neurotransmitters in the brain. The doctor says, Bob, you got 3 vessels blocked around your heart. We need to do emergency surgery today. We can't wait till tomorrow. It's got to be done today. You could die of a massive heart attack tonight, and there's nothing we can do about it. Bob, I want to take you to surgery. Now, the bad news is the truck hadn't come in today, so we really don't have anything to put you to sleep with, but that's okay because we got some leather straps, and we could just strap you down. That's right. Strap you down. I'm going to take a sharp knife and cut on your chest. Bob's going to hurt a little bit, but, we don't have a choice. Then I'm going to take an electric saw. We don't have to use those hand saws anymore, Bob. We've got these electric saws now. I'm going to zip right through your breastplate. Got some stainless steel spreaders. I'm going to spread you out good and wide so I can see. Bob, I got to see good. Take another scalpel and I'm going to cut on your leg. I'm going to get some veins from your leg. I'm going to sew them around your heart. Got some stainless steel wire. It's going to show you up good and tight. It's going to take 8 or 10 hours, but you'll be good as new, Bob. Bob, I can't lie to you. You're going to be in pain, but you're not going to have a heart attack. You'll live another 20 years. Can you imagine that? Anybody going to let them do open heart surgery on you unless they put you to sleep and, give you something when you wake up for pain? It's time to go. It's my time to go. That's okay, doc. 24 hours is fine. Narcotics, anesthetics allow us to do things we couldn't imagine doing 100 years ago, 200 years ago. But also what we discovered in the last 100 years is not for everybody, not even for most people, but for some people, when they begin to use a narcotic to feel good, like I did, or to relieve pain, like lots and lots of people do, when they begin to use a narcotic over time, not the first dose, the second dose, maybe not even the 100th dose, but repeated doses of narcotic, the brain learns a new pathway. Guess what the brain does? It begins to produce less enkephalin. The brain basically says, well, you get it from someplace else, so I don't have to produce as much. This doesn't happen immediately, but with repeated doses over time for some people, not everybody, but for some people, repeated doses of narcotic will eventually cause the brain to produce less enkephalin. The brain says you need more narcotic. Less enkephalin, you need more narcotic. That's compulsivity. That's compulsivity. You take a pill, your brain says you need another pill. Another pill, your brain says you need another pill. Same thing happens with other drugs. Alcohol is a lot more complicated. When people drink alcohol, what the body does is it converts it into CH3, CH2OH, that's alcohol. the body converts it into, the liver converts it into acetaldehyde. And then that's converted to acetyl-CoA. And there's more steps involved. And it's eventually converted into carbon dioxide and water. So when anybody consumes alcohol, the way your body gets rid of the alcohol is it changes it into carbon dioxide, which you breathe off, and water, which you urinate off. That's how your body rids itself of alcohol. It happens in everybody. Some people, not most people, but some people, after usually years of drinking, the body begins to develop a new pathway. These acetaldehyde condenses with a neurotransmitter called dopamine to form a chemical called tetrahydroperpaviroline. We'll call it THP for short. Not THC, but THP. So what I'm saying to you is, in the genetic alcoholic, usually after years of drinking, adolescents, it can be months. Even elderly people in their 70s and 80s, it can happen in 6 months or a year. But for most adults, after years of drinking, the body learns a new pathway. So when they consume alcohol, some of the alcohol goes to form THP. Why is that important? Because if you look at the molecular structure of THP, you'll find it's almost identical to morphine. What I'm saying to you is, when the alcoholic drinks alcohol, their body produces an opiate-like substance from the alcohol. So, after a month of no drinking, he says, I'm just going to have one drink. Once the body learns a new pathway, it never forgets it. Never forgets it. The liver produces THP. The brain produces less enkephalin. The brain says, you need another drink. THP, less enkephalin. You need another drink. That's compulsivity. It's controlled by the neurochemistry of the brain. With cocaine, I mentioned the neurotransmitter dopamine when talking about alcoholism. It's especially involved in cocaine and methamphetamine addiction. When people use cocaine, over time, they have a decreased production of dopamine. Dopamine is the reward neurotransmitter. You know, if you get an A on the test, it makes you feel good. It makes you feel good because your brain releases dopamine to reward you for getting an A, so you study hard. You get a raise on the job, it makes you feel good because your body releases dopamine to reward you for getting a raise, so you work hard. It's a neurotransmitter involved in reward. It's a neurotransmitter involved in cocaine addiction. The euphoria from people using cocaine initially is coming from a drastic increase in the amount of dopamine in the brain. That's where that euphoria comes from. But for some people, over time, what happens is the use of cocaine causes less dopamine, which causes more cocaine, which causes less dopamine. It's a neurotransmitter disease. The good news is, when people get into recovery, when they get sober, when they get clean, without exception, for every one of them, over time, the body's chemistry normalizes itself. It always has the ability to do that. So when people get sober, the chemistry of the brain begins to return to normal, and as that happens, sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes it takes months, even 6 months. But over time, as the chemistry of the brain normalizes, you know what happens? The compulsion to use the drug goes away. It doesn't stay there all the time. You know, I went into treatment on July the 23rd, 1979, the day after my 30th birthday, wanting to take a pill every second of every day. Can you imagine living the rest of your life wanting to do something every second of every day you can't do anymore? 25% of people who enter treatment for addiction have attempted suicide or thought about suicide. And I know one of the reasons is the financial and family problems, but I'm convinced, for me, one of the reasons was, I can't live like this. I can't live the rest of my life wanting to do something every day I can't do anymore. And I was about to leave treatment. A guy named Motorcycle Ed stopped me. He had a long ponytail, black. He had a leather vest, naked chest, more hairy chest. I'd never seen a hairy chest like that. Tattoos all his body. This is 1979. He had gotten off heroin, moved to Atlanta, got involved in NA. He said, "You want to leave?" I said, "I just can't take this." He says, "It goes away." He says, "I got to the point, I know what you're talking about. When I got off drugs, I want to use it all the time, but it goes away. I haven't wanted to use drugs in years. I've seen some other people come and go. They come in, they get clean, they get happy, they go out and they try it again, they don't make it back." He says, "I know if I go out and try it again, I'm not going to make it back." Motorcycle Ed didn't know anything about neurochemistry. Motorcycle Ed knew as long as I don't do it anymore, I'm not going to want to do it. If I do it one more time, I'm not going to be able to stop. He knew that. Dr. Bob and Bill Debbie didn't know anything about neurochemistry. They came up with the slogan for an alcoholic, "One drink is too many, and 1,000 never enough." And that's the reason. In recovery, guaranteed for everybody, the brain chemistry normalizes and you will lose your desire to use drugs. But 6 months later, a year later, and we had one got 20 years one time. 20 years later, you say to yourself, "Well, I can drink now. It's been a whole year, I'm not an alcoholic anymore. I don't shake with. I can have a drink now." If you convince yourself that you can do it one more time, that's what happens. No addict uses again to get strung out again. Nobody ever does that. They use again to do it one more time. That's why they can't do it. Appreciate y'all being here. I know it's a lot to ask for the family week to come for 3 days and make other arrangements for your family and for your job and stuff. But I think it's very, very important for not only the addict but for the family members to understand this disease. Most people think about addiction as a lack of willpower, as a lack of morality. Addicts do bad things when they use drugs. They steal, they lie. But they're not bad people. The disease causes addicts to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do, but it's the disease. Addicts are not stupid. They don't lack in willpower. They're not evil. They have a disease. And I think it's important for everybody to begin to try to grasp hold of that. So it can make sense of what behaviors that all of you have observed in the past. Why did he do that? This is what it's all about. Thanks for being here.